I am not fit for any man, sir, but I can love your children. The HR director of the penthouse estate stood in the marble foyer, her iPad tucked under a sharp arm. The family is relocating to the coast, Mia. Every other staff member has been placed in a new high society home. But you. She looked Mia up and down, her gaze lingering on Mia's soft curves and modest, worn sweater. Tell me, Mia, are you simply not fit for any man's household? Mia's hands stilled on the crate she was packing. The words hit like a physical blow, but they were an old song she knew by heart. 6 months ago she had spent her life savings on a dress for a blind date at a high-end gala. When the man saw her, he didn't even offer a greeting. He just turned to his friends and laughed. She's not what I ordered. She's not fit for any man's arm, let alone his heart. He had walked away without even asking her name. That sentence had become her shadow. Now the director was waiting for an answer. Mia smoothed her apron slowly. No, ma'am, she said quietly. I suppose I'm not fit for any man. The director nodded, satisfied. Then you'd better find a new line of work. Your severance ends in 48 hours. Mia stood alone in the empty penthouse. Scant savings in her bank account, nowhere to go. But that night on a private high-security job board she saw a listing that everyone else had scrolled past. A short, jagged notice that felt like a scream for help. Widower, billionaire, 2 children in crisis. Need someone who won't run. She didn't hesitate. She used her last bit of money for a car service to the outskirts of the city, where the Mateo fortress loomed behind iron gates. Mia stepped out of the car and froze. 3 other women were already at the gate, thin, poised, wearing designer suits, and laughing together about the monstrous children of the billionaire Mafia boss. A man stood at the top of the stone steps. Oliver Mateo was tall, his dark coat silhouetted against the sunset. He looked powerful, but his shoulders were tight with a weariness that went bone deep. Behind him stood 2 children, Jackson and Janet. They were dressed in expensive clothes, but they were too still, their eyes vacant with the kind of grief that doesn't make a sound. The women approached like they were doing him a favor. The first one spoke with a clipped, elite accent. What are the terms, Mr. Mateo? I require a 6-figure salary, my own wing in the estate, and I refuse to be present if there is any business trouble. Oliver's jaw tightened. My children are in danger of losing their minds to grief. They need a mother, not a contract. The second woman chimed in. I've raised heirs for the best families in Europe, but that boy, Jackson, he looks defiant. I'll need full authority to use strict measures. I won't have my reputation ruined by a difficult child. Oliver's eyes darkened. He isn't difficult, he's hurting. Their mother was taken from them 4 months ago. That's tragic, the third woman said flatly. But your house is a fortress and your children are ghosts. This isn't worth the risk to our careers. Good day. They turned and walked away, their heels clicking sharply on the stone. Oliver stood there, looking defeated in a way a king never should. Janet, the little girl with the dark braids, let a single tear slide down her face. Mia's heart cracked open. She stepped forward before she could talk herself out of it. The other women paused at the gate, looking back at her with sneers. What is she doing? Does she think this is a charity ward? Mia ignored them. She walked straight up the steps to Oliver Mateo. Mr. Mateo, I'm Mia Luna. I applied for the position. He looked at her, taking in her plus-sized frame, her tired eyes and her open, trembling hands. She waited for the familiar expression, the disappointment, the rejection, the not what I ordered. It didn't come. The woman at the gate laughed. Oh, this is rich. You think a man like Oliver Mateo wants a woman like you in his house. Look at yourself. Mia's face burned. The old shame rose up, choking her. But she forced herself to look at Oliver. She forced herself to speak the truth the world had branded into her. I am not fit for any man, sir, she said, her voice shaking but clear. I know that. I've known that for a long time. The estate went silent. The guards at the door went still. Mia looked past the billionaire at the 2 children, at the little girl with the tear-streaked face and the boy clutching his sister's hand so hard his knuckles were white. But I can love your children, Mia said, and her voice finally steadied. I can care for them. I can make them feel safe when the world is loud. I can be what they need, even if I'm not what any man wants. Oliver Mateo stared at her, the silence stretched out, heavy and endless. Then he asked one question. Will you stay? Mia's breath caught. Yes, she whispered, I'll stay. Oliver nodded once, a look of profound relief crossing his face. He didn't look at her size or her clothes. He looked at her heart. Then he reached down, took his daughter's hand and stepped aside to let Mia into his world. The heavy iron gates of the Mateo estate groaned as they closed behind Mia, sounding like the final click of a lock. As she followed Oliver toward the towering front doors, the silence of the grounds was oppressive. This wasn't just a house. It was a fortress of glass and cold stone, designed to keep the world out and the secrets in. Inside, the foyer was vast, echoing with every step Mia took in her sensible flats. Oliver didn't offer to take her bag. He didn't offer a tour. He simply walked to a massive mahogany desk near a wall of monitors and turned to face her. In the harsh lead light of the security hub, the exhaustion she had glimpsed on the steps was even more pronounced. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath his eyes, and the air around him felt heavy, charged with the jagged energy of a man who had forgotten how to sleep. "The children haven't spoken since the funeral," Oliver said, his voice dropping into a low, gravelly register. "3 nannies have quit in the last month. They say the house is cursed. They say the children are hollow." He pulled a thin file from the desk and slid it toward her. It contained the details of her position, the non-disclosure agreements, the security protocols, and the staggering salary. "I don't care about your resume, Mia. I saw what happened on the steps, but understand this, my world is dangerous. My enemies see vulnerability as an invitation. If you stay, you are part of this circle. You protect them, and my men protect you. Is that understood?" Mia didn't look at the file. She looked at Oliver, seeing not the billionaire boss, but a father drowning in a sea he couldn't navigate. "I'm not afraid of the danger, Mr. Mateo," she said softly. "I've lived my whole life feeling like the world was against me. I know how to keep my head down and my heart open." Oliver went quiet, his gaze intense and searching. He seemed to be looking for a crack in her resolve, a sign that she was like the others, women who wanted his name or his money but feared the reality of his life. "They're in the library," he said finally, gesturing toward a pair of arched doors. "They don't eat much, they don't play, they just exist." Mia nodded and picked up her small suitcase. As she turned to leave, Oliver spoke one last time. "Mia." She stopped and looked back. "Why did you say those things, about not being fit for any man?" The question hung in the air, raw and intrusive. Mia felt the old sting of the train platform, the memory of the laughter that had defined her for years. She offered him a small, sad smile, the smile of a woman who had accepted her fate. "Because the world is very loud about what it thinks a woman should be, Mr. Mateo. I just stopped arguing with it." She didn't wait for his response. She walked toward the library, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was her last gamble, a life in a gilded cage with a man who lived by the sword. But as she pushed open the heavy doors and saw the 2 small, lonely shadows sitting in the dim light of the bookshelves, she knew she hadn't come here for the billionaire. She had come for the ghosts. The library was a tomb of high ceilings and mahogany shelves, smelling of old leather and the cold, metallic scent of the estate's air filtration system. There was no sound of play, no humming of a television, not even the rustle of a page being turned. As Mia stepped further into the room, she found the children huddled together on an oversized velvet sofa that seemed to swallow them whole. Jackson, who couldn't have been more than 10, sat with his arm draped protectively over his younger sister, Janet. His eyes were hard, fixed on the door with a weary suspicion that no child should possess. Janet was smaller, her dark braids slightly frayed. Clutching a tattered stuffed rabbit, as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. "Hello," Mia said softly, keeping her distance. She didn't move toward them with the aggressive cheerfulness of the nannies who had come before her. Instead, she set her bag down and sat on a low ottoman several feet away. "My name is Mia. I brought a few things from the city, but I think I'm mostly here to make sure you're not so lonely." Jackson didn't blink. "We don't need a nanny, we don't want anyone here." The words were sharp, meant to wound and drive her away, but Mia only nodded. She recognized that tone. It was the armor of someone who expected to be hurt. "I know you don't," she replied gently. "And I'm not here to replace anyone, I'm just here to keep the house warm." Janet looked up then, her wide eyes searching Mia's face. She looked at Mia's soft features, the gentle curve of her waist and the kindness in her expression. There was a flicker of something in the girl's gaze, not trust yet but curiosity. "Are you going to yell?" Janet whispered, her voice barely audible. "The last one cried because Jackson wouldn't do his math. She called us monsters." Mia's heart twisted. She looked at the pair, so small against the backdrop of a billionaire's empire and a mafia king's legacy. They weren't wild, and they certainly weren't monsters. They were simply ghosts, haunted by a silence that their father didn't know how to break. "I don't yell," Mia promised. And I think math is a lot easier to do when you've had a warm meal and someone is sitting nearby. I heard the kitchen has some wonderful things, but it's much too quiet. Would you like to come with me while I make some cocoa? You don't have to talk, you just have to be there. Jackson's grip on his sister tightened, his jaw set in a line that mirrored his father, but his stomach betrayed him with a faint growl. It's okay to be hungry, Mia said, standing up slowly so as not to startle them. It's even okay to be sad, but you shouldn't have to be both at the same time. For a long moment the silence returned, heavy and thick. Then, slowly, Janet began to uncurl from her brother's side. She reached out a small, trembling hand toward Mia. Jackson didn't let go, but he stood up with her, his watchful eyes never leaving Mia's face. As they walked toward the kitchen, the house felt a fraction less like a tomb, and for the first time in months the shadows seemed to retreat. The kitchen of the Mateo estate was a cold expanse of industrial steel and white marble, designed for staff who were meant to be invisible. 2 armed guards stood like statues by the service entrance, their eyes tracking Mia's every move with professional coldness. They were a constant reminder of the world Oliver lived in, but Mia chose to look past their holstered weapons. She focused instead on the 2 children perched on high stools, looking small and out of place in their own home. Mia didn't ask for permission. She found a heavy pot, some whole milk and real cocoa powder. As the stove flickered to life, she began to hum a low, rhythmic melody, the kind of song that didn't demand attention but filled the empty spaces in a room. "This kitchen is far too clean," Mia remarked, her voice light as she whisked the darkening liquid. "A kitchen should smell like vanilla and toasted bread, don't you think?" Jackson remained guarded, his eyes darting toward the guards, but Janet watched Mia's hands. Mia noticed the way the little girl's gaze lingered on the steam rising from the pot. "In my grandmother's house," Mia continued, pouring the rich, frothy chocolate into 2 ceramic mugs she had found in the back of a cupboard, "we used to say that the dust in a house wasn't just dirt. It was the sadness settling down because no one was making enough noise to shake it off the shelves." She set the mugs down and, reaching into her apron pocket, produced a small bag of marshmallows she had tucked away. She placed 3 in each cup. Janet's eyes widened. The last nanny had restricted sugar to Saturday mornings only, citing dental hygiene and discipline. As the children began to sip, Mia didn't sit still. She grabbed a damp cloth and began to wipe down the counters, moving with a purposeful maternal energy that the house hadn't seen in months. She cleared away the stacks of unopened mail and the cold, professional meal prep containers left by the catering service. She opened a window, letting the sharp night air cut through the stagnant, recirculated oxygen of the fortress. "My mother used to braid my hair just like yours," Mia said softly, pausing beside Janet. The girl's braids were coming loose, the ribbons frayed. "But she always said that a braid needs to be tight enough to hold your secrets, but loose enough to let your dreams breathe." Janet looked up, a chocolate mustache smearing her upper lip. For a moment the heavy shadow of grief seemed to lift. Mia reached out, and with a gentle, practiced hand, she tucked a stray lock of hair behind Janet's ear. The little girl didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned almost imperceptibly into the touch. Then it happened, a small, tentative curving of the lips. It wasn't a laugh and it wasn't a loud declaration of joy, but it was a smile. It was the first bit of light to hit the girl's face since the funeral. In the doorway, unnoticed by the children, Oliver stood in the shadows. He watched as Mia wiped the chocolate from his daughter's face, ignoring the stone-faced guards and the weight of his empire. He went quiet, his chest tightening as he realized that this woman, who claimed to be fit for no man, was already doing the one thing his billions couldn't. She was bringing his daughter back to life. The following morning, the fragile piece of the cocoa and smiles felt like a distant dream. Jackson stood in the center of the schoolroom Mia had spent the early hours organizing, his small face a mask of cold defiance. With a slow, deliberate motion, he swept a stack of books off the desk. They hit the hardwood floor with a series of sharp cracks that echoed like gunfire in the silent house. Mia didn't jump, she didn't scold him. She simply looked up from the window where she had been hanging a set of simple, yellow curtains she'd found in a linen closet. "That's a lot of noise for a Tuesday morning, Jackson," she said, her voice as calm as a still lake. "I'm not doing it," he spat, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "I'm not learning from you. You're just like the others. You're going to get tired of us. You're going to get scared of my father's friends and you're going to leave, so just go now." He grabbed a crystal inkwell, a heavy, expensive relic of his father's world, and raised it above his head. His knuckles were white, his chest heaving with a combination of rage and the terrifying hope that she would finally snap. He wanted the monster he expected. He wanted the rejection he was used to. Mia stepped toward him, but she didn't reach for the inkwell. She stopped just a foot away, placing herself directly in his line of fire. She saw the tremor in his arms, the way his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You think your anger is big enough to frighten me," she said softly, looking him dead in the eye. "But I've been yelled at by people much louder than you, Jackson. I've been told I was nothing by people who had everything. Your anger doesn't scare me, it just tells me how much you miss your mom." The boy's breath hitched. He shook his head, his face contorting. "You don't know anything. My father is a killer. People disappear because of him. You should be running." "I've nowhere to run to," Mia replied, her voice steady and unwavering. "And even if I did, I wouldn't go. I told your father I wasn't fit for any man, and I meant it. That means I don't have a husband to go home to or a life waiting for me elsewhere. I am here for you and Janet. If you want to break every book in this room, go ahead. I'll just help you pick up the pieces when you're done, but I am staying." The inkwell shook in his hand. The silence in the room became heavy, a battle of wills between a boy trying to survive and a woman who had already survived everything. Slowly, the tension drained from Jackson's shoulders. His arm dropped, and he set the inkwell back on the desk with a trembling hand. He looked at her, truly looked at her, seeing the quiet courage in her soft features. He didn't apologize, he wasn't ready for that, but he knelt on the floor and began to gather the fallen books. Mia knelt beside him, her presence a silent promise that the wall he had built was finally starting to crumble. In the doorway, the shadow of Oliver Mateo lingered for a second longer before vanishing into the hallway, his footsteps for once making no sound at all. The nights in the Mateo estate had always been the hardest, filled with the heavy, pressurized silence of a mausoleum. Usually. Oliver wandered the halls like a ghost himself, checking the perimeter and the high-tech security feeds, his mind a battlefield of business rivals and blood debts. But tonight, as he approached the children's wing, a sound stopped him in his tracks, a low, melodic vibration that seemed to soften the very air. He stepped into the shadows near the nursery door, which stood slightly ajar. Inside, the only light came from a small, amber lamp. Mia was sitting on the edge of Janet's bed, her soft silhouette framed by the golden glow. She was holding Janet's hand, but her gaze was fixed on Jackson, who had dragged a chair close to his sister's bed. For the first time, the boy didn't look like a soldier. He looked like a tired child, his head nodding in time with the music. Mia was singing. It wasn't an opera or a performance. It was a simple, soulful lullaby, her voice rich and steady, carrying a warmth that the cold marble floors had long ago forgotten. The song spoke of a place where the wind didn't bite and where every heart was enough just as it was. "My mother sang that when the storms got too loud," Mia whispered after the last note faded. "Did it make the storms go away?" Janet's voice was small, drowsy. "No, sweetheart," Mia said, smoothing back the girl's hair. "The storms still happened, but the song reminded us that we were stronger than the wind. It made the house feel like a shield." Oliver watched from the darkness, his hand tightening on the doorframe. He had provided his children with every physical shield money could buy, bulletproof glass, armored cars, and men with guns. But he had left their hearts completely exposed to the elements. He looked at Mia, at her open expression and the selfless way she leaned into his children's lives, and felt a strange, terrifying ache in his chest. For years, Oliver had viewed people as assets or liabilities. He had been told Mia was a liability, unpolished, unsuitable, and not fit for the world he moved in. But as he watched her hum a few more bars, he saw the way Jackson's shoulders finally dropped, the way the boy's hand loosened its grip on the chair. She was doing something his millions never could. She was providing a sanctuary within the fortress. He didn't enter. He feared his presence would shatter the fragile peace she had woven. As he turned to walk back to his cold, lonely office, the melody followed him. The billionaire Mafia boss, a man who had silenced cities with a single word, went quiet. The rhythm of her song stayed in his pulse, and for the first time since his wife's death, the ice around his heart didn't just crack, it began to bleed. He realized then that he hadn't just hired a nanny. He had invited a light into his darkness, and he wasn't sure he could ever let it go. The following afternoon, the sun sat low, casting long skeletal shadows across Oliver's private study. The room was a monument to clinical precision, every book aligned, every surface dusted, yet it felt starved of oxygen. Oliver sat behind his desk, a glass of amber liquid untouched at his elbow, staring at a blank wall. There were no photographs in the room, no mementos, no traces of the woman who had shared his life. Mia entered without knocking, carrying a small cardboard box she had recovered from the back of a hallway closet. She set it firmly on the edge of the mahogany desk. Oliver didn't look up. "The children are asking about Sarah, Mr. Mateo," she said, her voice a calm ripple in the stagnant air. Oliver's hand tightened around the arm of his chair. "We don't speak of her. It is easier for them this way. To move forward, one must look forward." "They aren't moving forward," Mia countered, stepping closer. "They're walking in place, terrified that if they take a step they'll forget her face. Jackson thinks he's failing you by being sad, and Janet thinks her mother disappeared because she did something wrong. You've scrubbed this house so clean of her memory that it feels like she never existed." Oliver finally looked at her, his eyes flashing with a cold, sharp pain. "You know nothing of this. You are here to care for them, not to psychoanalyze me. She was everything, and now she is gone. The world I live in doesn't allow for the luxury of dwelling on ghosts." "It's not a luxury, it's a necessity," Mia said, her voice softening but losing none of its strength. "You call this a fortress, but it's a tomb. I was told I wasn't fit for a man because of how I look, so I learned to live in the shadows. I know what it's like to feel invisible. But your children aren't invisible, and neither was their mother. They need to say her name. They need to know it's okay to cry without feeling like they're breaking a rule." She reached into the box and pulled out a silver-framed photograph, a woman laughing in a garden, her eyes bright and full of life. She placed it in the center of the desk. "I found this hidden under a stack of linens. Janet told me her mother used to smell like lavender. Today I bought some for her room." Oliver stared at the photo, his breath hitching in his chest. The silence in the room shifted from cold to heavy, thick with the grief he had spent months trying to outrun. He looked at Mia, the woman he had once seen as a mere employee, and saw the quiet courage it took for her to stand before a man like him and demand the truth. "They are drowning Oliver," she whispered, using his name for the first time, "and so are you." For a long moment the billionaire Mafia boss didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched the glass of the frame. His fingers trembled. The mask didn't fall all at once, but a crack appeared, deep and irreversible. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice barely a ghost of itself. "You don't have to," Mia replied. "You just have to let them remember. I'll be right there to catch them if they fall." The fragile peace Mia had built was shattered on a Tuesday afternoon by the sound of sirens and the heavy tread of polished shoes. It wasn't the violent rivals Oliver usually feared, but a far more clinical enemy. A black sedan had pulled into the drive, carrying a representative from the Child Protective Bureau and a woman Mia recognized from the local social pages, Bianca Vane, a cousin of Oliver's late wife and the woman who had led the high society charge to have Mia removed. Oliver met them in the foyer, his face a mask of stone. Mia stood on the landing of the grand staircase, her hands instinctively resting on the shoulders of Jackson and Janet. "Mr. Mateo," the official began, looking at his clipboard with a practiced, detached air. "We've received a formal complaint regarding the living arrangements in this household. Specifically, the presence of an unlicensed, unsuitable woman living under the same roof as a single man while caring for minors. The claim suggests a lack of moral propriety and a potential for neglect." Bianca stepped forward, her eyes sweeping over Mia with a familiar, cutting coldness. "Let's be honest, Oliver. This isn't about her credentials. Look at her. She's a vagrant you picked off a job board. She doesn't fit the image of this family, and she certainly doesn't belong in Sarah's house. The community is talking. It's improper, it's unrefined, and frankly, it's a disgrace to Sarah's memory. She has done more for my children in weeks than any of your hand-picked nannies did in months." Oliver's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. The air in the foyer seemed to vibrate with his suppressed rage. "That may be," the official interrupted, "but without a formal contract, a teaching license, or a legal tie to this family, the moral character clause of the city's guardianship laws is being invoked. Given your reputation, Mr. Mateo, the court is inclined to take these complaints seriously. Unless the situation changes, we are here to serve notice. Miss Luna has 48 hours to vacate the premises, or the children will be placed in the temporary custody of a state-sanctioned guardian." Janet's grip on Mia's apron tightened so hard her small knuckles turned white. Jackson looked up at Mia, his eyes wide with a terror she hadn't seen since the first day. The wall they had finally broken down was being rebuilt by people who didn't even know their names. "You can't do this," Mia said, her voice trembling but audible from the landing. "They just started to feel safe." Bianca laughed, a sharp, jarring sound. "Safety isn't just about locks on doors, dear. It's about being raised by the right kind of people. And you're clearly just a temporary fix who overstayed her welcome." Oliver looked up at Mia. For the first time, he didn't look like a boss or a billionaire. He looked like a man who was about to lose the only light he had left. The threat was clear. The world that had told Mia she wasn't fit was now coming to prove it by taking away the only people who believed she was. As the officials left the paperwork on the marble table, the house felt colder than it ever had before. The clock on the mantel ticked with a rhythmic cruelty, counting down the final hours of the 48-hour ultimatum. Rain lashed against the reinforced glass of the estate, mirroring the storm brewing inside. In the quiet of her small room, Mia folded her modest sweaters with trembling hands, placing them neatly into her worn suitcase. She had been told all her life that she was a problem to be solved, a mismatch in a world of perfect lines. If her presence gave Oliver's enemies the ammunition they needed to take his children, she would remove herself. She would go back to being invisible if it meant Jackson and Janet stayed safe. She jumped as the door creaked open. It wasn't the guards or Oliver. Jackson and Janet stood there, their faces pale in the dim lamplight. Jackson took one look at the open suitcase and stepped into the room, his jaw set in that familiar, defiant line. "No," he said, his voice cracking but firm. "You're not doing this. You're not leaving us like everyone else." "Jackson, honey, listen to me," Mia said, kneeling so she was at their level. "Those people, the ones who came today, they think I'm not the right fit for this house. If I stay, they might take you away from your father. They might put you in a place where you aren't together. I can't let that happen because I love you." "Then we'll go with you," Janet whispered, her lip quivering as she clutched her tattered rabbit. She threw her small arms around Mia's neck, burying her face in Mia's shoulder. "I don't care about the big house or the toys. I want the songs, I want the cocoa, I want you." Mia felt the hot prickle of tears as she held the little girl tight. She looked up at Jackson, expecting the stoic soldier, but saw only a terrified boy. "They said you weren't fit," Jackson said, his voice trembling with a sudden, fierce anger. "But they don't know anything. You're the only one who didn't look at us like we were broken. You're the only one who made Dad look at Mom's picture again. If you leave, the dust is just going to come back. The sadness is going to settle on everything again." The weight of their desperation anchored Mia to the floor. For the first time in her life, she realized that fitting in had nothing to do with the shape of her body or the status of her name. It was about the space she occupied in the hearts of those who needed her. A shadow darkened the doorway. Oliver stood there, watching the three of them. He looked at the half-packed suitcase and then at the way his children were clinging to the woman the world had rejected. The cold, calculated billionaire was gone. In his place was a man who had finally realized that some battles couldn't be won with money or force. They required a different kind of courage. "They're right, Mia," Oliver said, his voice low and steady. "If you walk out that door, you aren't protecting us. You're leaving us in the dark. I won't let them take you. I won't let them take any of you." Mia looked from the children to the man who stood as their shield. She slowly reached out and clicked the suitcase shut. She wasn't a sacrifice today. She was home. The heavy oak doors of the city's administrative court swung open, revealing a room packed with the very socialites and rivals who had whispered about Mia since her arrival. At the front, the magistrate sat behind a high bench, looking down at the paperwork that threatened to dismantle a family. Bianca Vane sat in the front row, a triumphant, icy smile playing on her lips. She expected a surrender. She expected to see the unsuitable woman slink away in shame. Oliver entered first, his stride commanding, but he didn't walk to the witness stand. He stopped in the center of the aisle and reached back, taking Mia's hand. For the first time in public, he didn't hide her behind his shadow. He brought her forward, her soft features set in a line of quiet, unwavering courage. Jackson and Janet followed closely, clinging to Mia as if she were the earth itself. "Mr. Mateo," the magistrate began, peering over his glasses. "The complaint regarding moral impropriety and the suitability of Miss Luna's presence in your home is quite specific. Social standards and the welfare of the children are at stake. Do you have a response to the claim that she is unfit to remain?" Oliver looked at the room, his gaze so sharp that even his fiercest rivals looked away. Then he turned to Mia. "For years, I believed that my world was only built on power and walls. I was told that a man like me needed a specific kind of woman, a trophy, a peer, a queen. And Mia was told she wasn't fit for any man because she didn't match the world's shallow reflection of beauty." He stepped closer to her, his voice echoing with a raw, startling honesty. "But while the rest of the world looked at her and saw a mismatch, my children looked at her and saw a savior. She didn't just care for them, she loved them when I didn't know how to. She brought light back into a house that was dying of silence. If being fit means being cold, judgmental, and hollow, then no, she isn't fit for that world. But she is the only soul fit for mine." The room went deathly silent. Bianca's smile vanished. Oliver turned back to the judge. The complaint suggests an impropriety of living arrangements. We are here today to rectify that, not because a court demands it, but because I cannot imagine a future where she isn't the heart of my home. He reached into his pocket and produced a simple, elegant band, not a Mafia statement but a promise. He didn't ask her in a whisper, he asked her before the world that had rejected her. Mia Luna, you said you weren't fit for any man. You were wrong, you are the only one I want. Will you stay not as a nanny but as my wife? Tears blurred Mia's vision, but they weren't the tears of the girl on the train platform or the lonely kitchen hand. They were the tears of a woman who finally saw herself through the eyes of those who loved her. She looked at Jackson and Janet, who were beaming through their own tears, and then at Oliver, the man who had traded his cold empire for her warmth. Yes, she whispered, her voice carrying to the very back of the room. I'll stay. The magistrate cleared his throat, the paperwork on his desk suddenly seeming trivial. Case dismissed, he muttered, on the condition of the upcoming nuptials. As they walked out of the courthouse, Mia didn't try to make herself small or invisible. She walked tall beside the man who held her hand tightly, finally realizing the truth. She wasn't fit for any man. She was exactly, perfectly right for this one.